Warning. The following may contain concepts, ideas, and/or reflections unique in nature and not yet approved by government and/or corporate entities. This content is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended to stimulate further reflection or to perpetuate additional discourse beyond the scope already outlined by institutional curriculum.
Cultured meat, slaughter-free meat, vitro meat, vat-grown meat, lab-grown meat, cell-based meat, clean meat, cultivated meat, synthetic meat. The PR firms seem to be conflicted on how to best spin this one. Currently, they've settled on the term cultivated meat, which makes sense since it is one of the vaguest terms available. And while lab-grown meat is more accurate, it also gives the impression of a mad scientist growing some experimental abomination in a petri dish. Yes, definitely much too accurate. Instead, cultivated meat gives the impression of a man planting organic steak seeds in a fertile ground, and then humbly smoking his corncob pipe, waiting for his meat plants to mature to a harvestable point. An undiscerning public may even believe that cultivated meat is simply a trendy new term for the traditional livestock farms. Off to a deceitful start. I like it. Let's take a look at an article from the Business Wire, which discusses the hot new company Good Meats, which is supposed to be a leader in the lab-grown meat industry. This impartial journalist, Andrew Noyes, who also works as Good Meat's press agent, gives us all the pertinent details, with no sugarcoating. Good Meat is a subsidiary of Eat Just, not to be confused with Just Eat, the multinational food delivery service. No, Eat Just makes eggs entirely made from plants, and was heralded as technology pioneer by the World Economic Forum. Now that's an endorsement I can trust. Good Meat has received regulatory approval to sell their products in Singapore, and similar approval from the FDA is expected to be finalized in the US soon. In anticipation of this, they are already preparing to build a US facility capable of producing up to 30 million pounds of synthetic meat. So what is lab-grown meat really, and how is it produced? Details are difficult to come by, but here's what I've dredged up. Stem cells are found in the highest concentration and in their most useful state in the fertilized embryos of animals. In the early stages of a mammal's embryonic development, the 50 to 150 cell blastocyst is formed. At this stage of development, these 50 to 150 cells can form nearly any cellular structure in a mammal's body. And scientists call this cell state to be pluripotent. Other stem cells exist, even in the body of an adult, but this pluripotent stem cell is by far the most useful. Now, if you are not aware, these pluripotent stem cells have been the subject of a lot of research over the years. They are seen as having a great potential for treating a wide variety of degenerative diseases, and for growing tissue or organs which may later be transplanted into a medical patient. It all sounds so simple. Extract the cells from an embryonic blastocyst, and these neutral cells may then be grown into whatever the scientist requires. No need for an organ donor, and possibly no need for major surgery if one could just inject the stem cells directly into a damaged area and let the pluripotent cells do their magic. Now, this is just speculation on my part, but I think that the main problem here, and why we don't see this miracle science implemented everywhere, is that the embryonic stem cells come from a living organism, and every living organism has its own unique genetic material. Transplanting any foreign cell into another body, no matter how close the genetic match, will result in a response from the recipient's immune system. This is why every organ transplant recipient must take drugs to ensure that the foreign organ isn't rejected. And I believe that the embryonic stem cells are no different. Going back to lab-grown meats, they also use stem cells to grow their succulent steaks. But to quote Wikipedia, while pluripotent stem cells would be an ideal source, the most prominent example of this subcategory is embryonic stem cells, which, due to ethical issues, are controversial for use in research. As a result, scientists have developed induced pluripotent stem cells. In short, we would love to feed people fertilized embryos, but it would sort of take the wind out of our sails for our slaughter-free meat statement. So what are induced pluripotent stem cells then? Before we start, Wikipedia has a disclaimer on the subject, that there are no third-party sources available for the article, so there may be bias in the descriptions. Keeping that caveat in mind, let's see how this all works. So by taking an adult's blood or skin cell, and with a little bit of genetic voodoo, the scientists may regress the cell back into a pluripotent state. 2 of the 4 pieces of genetic material used in this process seem to originate from the embryo, with the outlier, CMYC, being linked to cancer in the resulting pluripotent mass. CMYC is used to reduce the time and increase the efficiency of the process. But even with its use, the whole process takes 3 to 4 weeks and is 0.01 to 0.1% effective in inducing pluripotent stem cells. You gotta love those odds. If it is true that they are indeed using this method to grow meat, then I think that it would be safe to say that the lab-grown meat is a highly energy inefficient way to produce the product. Not to mention that the petri-dish steak will likely be cancer-ridden or genetically mutated. How could I make this assumption? Well, if the induced pluripotent cells were healthy and sound, then they wouldn't be used to grow edible animal flesh. Rather, they would be used exclusively in the medical science fields. Because if they can induce pluripotency from an adult cell effectively, then they could just take a hair, skin, or blood sample from a patient and simply grow them whatever they needed, with no fear of rejection because the patient's own genetic material would be the building block for the cell. I almost feel like the researchers had this conversation. Hey Tim, how's the patient's liver coming along? Well, sir, it's riddled with cancer, genetically deformed, and completely non-functional. Ooh, that's less than ideal. I have the company's shareholders coming for a facility tour today. Wait, I've got it. Do you think that thing could make a passable foie gras? Don't question, just get the lunchroom ready. And what are the potential health side effects of consuming this Frankenstein meat? I couldn't say, because none of these new products appear to have been peer-reviewed. In fact, I would say that it would be difficult to find one disparaging article on the subject. It's supposed to be slaughter-free, but nowhere could I find where these companies source their biological material. However, in a 2013 experimental study pulled from Oxford University's website, cited the process for cloning cow chimeras. Both cloning and lab-grown meat require stem cells to be grown in a medium. The cow's ovaries were sourced from a slaughterhouse, and 20 nanograms of recombinant human LIF was used in the process. Human LIF is found in developing embryos. Are the fake meat producers willing to guarantee that no human cellular matter is used in their products? Why would I suspect that human cellular matter is potentially being used in synthetic meat? Well, whether they are directly using embryonic stem cells or using genes derived from the embryo, I have found no claim that pluripotent stem cells can be created with no embryonic cellular material. Regardless of one's political leanings, the reality is that 73 million human abortions are carried out every year globally. And according to PubMed, embryonic stem cells must be recovered from aborted fetuses or live embryos. Clearly, human embryonic material is in abundant supply and has been used prolifically in stem cell research. So it is not implausible to speculate that some human cells or genetic material could be used in the slaughter-free meat production. According to this scientific paper in 2014, to date, efforts to establish pluripotent embryonic stem cells from bovine embryos have failed. Barring the new meats companies making some major scientific breakthrough that they are keeping under their caps, any lab-grown beef product must be made using trans-species embryonic cells and/or embryonic genetic material. I will state that I could find no direct confirmation for synthetic meat production's specific source for stem cells. By and large, this is a new scientific development, and all of these processes are patented technologies, so a lack of transparency is to be expected. It is possible that in the case of synthetic beef, the stem cells are solely derived from non-human embryonic stem cells, or in the case of induced pluripotent stem cells, that 2 of the 4 genes used in the process are also derived from non-human embryos. However, the whole process seems wildly impractical. This is being sold to the public as a viable solution in the fight against climate change, as lab-grown meat produces much less greenhouse gases than traditional husbandry. Really? Where is the mathematical evidence of this? How much energy is consumed to produce 1 pound of flesh traditionally, compared to the lab-grown substitute? The lab-grown process sounds very labor and energy intensive. First, harvest living and viable cow cells. Then, by using genetic material from an unknown source, induce a pluripotent state in the bovine cell. The growth medium will need to be constantly monitored and have appropriate levels of leukemia inhibitory factor, along with a mixture of other compounds to ensure that the petri-dish doesn't form cancer, doesn't stop growing, and doesn't revert to a cell differentiating state. That last one is important because we don't want your steak to start growing skin, hair, or organ material. Unless you're into that sort of thing. The entire process must be climate controlled in a lab with advanced equipment and even more advanced lab technicians. Or allow a calf to be born naturally and eat grass until it is eventually butchered. Another question is, why would Wikipedia state that the use of embryonic stem cells is controversial due to ethical issues, if non-human embryonic stem cells are being used? We slaughter cattle at every stage of their development, so what would be so unethical about harvesting their embryos? If a person is fine with eating cow meat grown in large vats, then I'm sure that they would have no problem knowing that a few million bovine blastocysts were used in the process. Unless, of course, some of those stem cells actually do have a human origin, then I could understand the ethical issue. Let's take a quick look at what the company Good Meat has to say about their meat-making process. Engineering a natural and innovative process to grow meat for the world. Sorry, what? Could you please define what natural is supposed to mean in this instance? Because nothing in this photo looks very natural. Moving along. We feed cells in a clean, sterile environment, mirroring how an animal grows. Funny mirror that they have there, because as far as I know, animals' flesh tend to grow in parallel with their brains, eyes, skin, and organs. Looks like someone's been spending too much time in the biolab. They continue. Good meat has a smaller impact on our planet and avoids slaughter. Ooh, it's a good thing that they avoid slaughter. Although if I was given the option, okay, you can live a short life and then you'll be slaughtered. Ooh, don't like that. What's my second option? We take your genetic material, we use it to grow your muscle fibers so that we can eat it. And other than your flesh in a vat, you'll never exist. What was that first option again? Sourcing. We begin by sourcing the best cells from the best chickens and cows. We painlessly extract cells from an egg or living animal. I wish this was a joke, because then it would be actually funny. Yo, Bill, get a look at them rhizomes in that there cell. Ooh-wee. Have you ever seen such a tightly woven nuclear strand? Gosh, I love my job. Sourcing the best cow and chicken cells. It shows in the quality of that genetic slurry we turn out later. On a side note, an article about growing cell cultures had this to say. Studies suggest anywhere from 15 to 20% of the time, cells used in experiments have been misidentified or contaminated from other cell lines. Again, gotta like those odds. Selecting. We examine the cells and choose the ones most likely to produce the healthiest, most delicious, and most sustainable meat. This company does hire scientists, right? They have a dish of pluripotent stem cells and some living muscle cells attached to it as a catalyst for programming the stem cells to replicate in a certain way. I don't think that health, taste, or sustainability is within their grasp to control, and definitely not something that could be ascertained from viewing an animal cell from under a microscope. Cell bank. The cells are immortalized, meaning that they can continue to divide and produce good meat indefinitely. Okay, but cancer cells also divide and produce more substance indefinitely. I hope this is not the type of good meat that they are referring to. If these stem cells are not severely mutated, then why just grow meat? Why not indefinitely produce red blood cells and plasma, ending the need for blood drives? Surely non-mutant immortalized cells could have a better use than this. Oh right, they're full of crap. And here they try to compare their work to that of breweries. The sacrilege. Ironically, their growth medium recipe does look more like a beer recipe than an animal flesh incubator. Take a look. We have our grain, corn and wheat, we have sugar, and surprisingly yeast. Yes, yeast, to grow animal flesh in a large vat. I'm speechless. So, what conclusions might we draw from all of this information? In my mind, there are three possibilities here. First, these lab-growing meat companies are a scam, using pseudoscience and widespread ignorance surrounding genetic microbiology to scam investors and government agencies for billions of dollars. It would not be the first time a scientific breakthrough took the money and ran, never to be heard of again. This would be the best-case scenario. Second, they're planning to scale up this lab-grown meat and feed it to the general population. In this example, they are producing the meat as proposed, through induced pluripotent stem cells, meaning that the resulting meat being full of mutated and/or cancerous cells is highly likely. If you want to stay away from this oral terror, then I would suggest committing these names to memory, as many of them would only give a vague indication as to their origin. For example, Elif Farms, Appleton Meats, Artemis Foods, Finless Foods, Gaia Foods, Higher Steaks, Horkston Farms, Mirai Foods, Mosa Meat, Super Meat, Wild Type Foods. The third and worst scenario is that they are synthesizing animal flesh, but they are using the readily available embryonic stem cells to do so. In which case, there is a good chance that some of those cells have a human origin, and personally, I would prefer to slaughter a cow than to be a cannibal once removed. I know that there is a lot of information in this video, and if you're uncertain as to the veracity of some of my statements, I would encourage you to click on some of the links in the description and read the data for yourself. Anyways, thanks for making it this far in the video. I appreciate your patience. Until next time.